Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 193, Speaking Hamlet, a conversation with Colin David Reese. For today's guest episode, it is a very welcome return to the podcast for Colin David Reese, who I last spoke to in early 2023, when we discussed his play Shakespeare Unbound, A Gift to the Future, and Shakespeare in general. If you missed those episodes, you'll find them as part of Season 5, first released in February and April 2023. On this occasion, I asked Colin to discuss Shakespeare's use of language, with particular reference to Hamlet, and how that language is used to create character. Colin goes into some depth into two of Hamlet's most famous speeches from the play, so although it's by no means essential, you might find it useful to have a copy of the speeches to hand to follow along. You will need To Be or Not to Be from Act 3, Scene 1, and Oh What a Rogue and Peasant Slave Am I from Act 2, Scene 2. We also spoke about the differences between the quarto and folio versions of the play, with examples of the language from them. And as this has become a rather long but richly detailed episode, I've split it into two and will share the part dealing with characterisation, and particularly with Polonius, after my second episode discussing the play. Colin David Reese has not only a lifetime of acting experience behind him, but a lifetime of Shakespeare study too. That started in his family life, where his actor father had a Shakespeare quote for every occasion, and continued with his first professional engagement when, aged just 12, he played Shakespeare's illegitimate son. Along with his many acting roles, he has run his own theatre company and undertaken in-depth study of Shakespeare and the Commedia dell'arte. I've put a link in the show notes to Colin's full biography and to his play Shakespeare Unbound, which he has produced for online viewing. That's all at his website, which is www.shakespeareunbound.org. When I spoke to Colin over Zoom from his home in France, I first asked him for a quick introduction to Shakespeare Unbound.
I have performed my play Shakespeare Unbound, A Gift to the Future, which is available online through the website shakespeareunbound.org. It's the story of when John Hemmings, who with Henry Condell compiled the first folio and had it printed at the Jagged's print shop. It's the story of John Hemmings coming home with the first printing of the folio. And he has spent 7 years collating the different texts, and he's now looking at the folio and wondering if all this has been in vain. So he calls to the ghosts of the future and says, has this all been in vain? And through the magic of technology, he finds himself in a Zoom meeting in 2023, in fact, talking to moving images. And so he is somewhat in a state of shock, as I think any 17th century person would be. And so he asks the ghosts of the future, I've spent 7 years preparing this document, has his name survived? And the people respond yes. And so he is obviously quite moved by that fact, and he then proceeds to tell the story of what it was like to work alongside the greatest playwright of all time. The play has anecdotes, the play has some speeches illustrating the anecdotes, there it is.
And it is very entertaining and full of Shakespearean spirit, I would say, and well worth a look. I'll certainly be putting a link in the show notes to anybody who wants to follow that up with you. Really, it also summarises in some ways why I wanted to talk to an actor about Hamlet, because it is a play that has become steeped in all sorts of academia. And sometimes I think maybe we forget that it's a play that was performed. But we probably do have to start with a bit of a conversation about what play is it that is being performed. Because as I mentioned in the last episode, there are actually effectively three different versions of this play. And what we tend to see is an amalgam to some extent or another of those three, which leaves directors with a challenge, a problem, but also maybe an opportunity.
Indeed, there is the first quarto, which is also known as the bad quarto. There is the second quarto, which is probably what the Chamberlain's men put out in response to the first quarto. And then there is the folio version. Now, what academics do is they take, as you say, an amalgam of these three versions and turn it into a play which, if you look in your complete works, would actually take about 5 hours to perform. So, as you say, any director who is who decides to put this play on the stage has to choose what to cut, and to a great extent why. So yes, we do have to take that into consideration when we are talking about the play Hamlet, because what we see in our complete works was never performed on an early modern stage.
And would you say there's a good reason to believe that the folio version is the best version and the one that should be taken, or is there much of value to be had from the earlier quartos?
Well, given that the folio version was put together by Hemmings and Condell, who had worked on the play with the playwright, I would say that the folio version, well, certainly in their opinion, would have been the best version that exists. Of course, all playwrights rewrite constantly. Just as a side note here, I once had the incredibly good fortune to have dinner with Peter Shaffer, who is, I think, my favorite 20th century playwright. And I asked him how much of what you have consigned to the paper survives when it gets to the first night. He thought about it for a moment and he said, if I have done my job correctly as a playwright, I would say about 20%. And I went, that's certainly very humble, because when the new play is put in front of the actors who are going to perform it, the playwright's, what he's consigned to paper actually becomes a template, which the performers then turn into a performable play. There's a couple of other things I learnt from Peter Shaffer when I had that conversation with him, which are not perhaps for here, although maybe for another time.
That would be very interesting, I'm sure. But you've offered to read us a very famous part from the play, and we're going to take the version from the first quarto, the one that's often called the bad quarto, just to show what the differences are between a speech that I'm sure pretty much everyone listening will know at least the first few lines.
To be or not to be, aye, there's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? Aye, all. No, to sleep, to dream, aye, marry, there it goes. For in that dream of death when we awake, and born before an everlasting judge, from whence no passenger ever returned, the undiscovered country, at whose sight the happy smile and the accursed damned, but for this, the joyful hope of this, who would bear the scorns and flattery of the world, scorned by the right rich, the rich accursed of the poor, the widow being oppressed, the orphan wronged, the taste of hunger or a tyrant's reign, and 1,000 more calamities besides, grunt and sweat under this weary life, when he might his full quietus make with a bare bodkin, who would endure, but for the hope of something after death, which puzzles the brain and doth confound the sense, which makes us rather bear those evils that we have than fly to others that we know not of. Aye, that, oh, this conscience makes cowards of us all. Lady, in thy orisons may or be all my sins remembered. There's one thing I've discovered from talking to an academic. Quietus has nothing to do with quiet. It is quits. It comes from quits. And this is somebody who has done quite a lot of work on early modern literature, and he has found absolutely no use of the word quietus, meaning quiet, but several uses of the word quietus, meaning quits. So when that he might his full quietus make with a bare bodkin means getting his revenge. So that's one thing. So there we have it. I must say, as an actor, I find it extremely difficult to read because one thing that it really is missing is that genius that is Shakespeare. The way the iambic pentameter is used and the way that the verse is constructed. And I suppose the essential sense remains the same, but what it's lacking on every level is the poetry, something I call the performability. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would these fardels bear? To grunt and sweat under a weary life, but the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is cicled o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph in thy orisons, be all my sins remembered.
Thank you. I think everybody will be able to hear that rhythmically that works is much more astute than the first version, and there's much more of the sense of Hamlet having an internal discussion with himself. There's the ebb and flow
Yes.
of his internal
Yeah.
thought as he's kind of arguing with himself.
Yes. So your observation is in the text itself, and it's in the structure of the way he has used the verse and the iambic pentameter. Now, there are several midline endings which are very useful for an actor. Let's go to the first few lines. To be or not to be, that is the question. One thing about punctuation. I had the amazing good fortune to actually see a real Q script, the one at Dulwich College. And it was Edward Delane's Q script. One thing I noticed as I held it reverently in my hands with my statutory white gloves was that on the Q script there was no punctuation, no there was full stops or question marks, but there were no commas, colons, semicolons, etc., etc. So I deduce from that the Q script was given to the player without punctuation, and the player then chose his own punctuation. Now, obviously, when you're going to print something, punctuation is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you end up eating grandma.
Right.
Let's eat grandma. So one has to be very cautious about any punctuation that you see in the texts that you have, because yes, in the folio there is punctuation, but then again, it's a text that was written, was produced to be read. And so, even back in 1623 or 2 years before 1621, when they probably started, the punctuation had to be added. One thing that is interesting to note here is that there were 7 compositors working on the first folio. The man who put together the first folio for the Folger isolated through style the different typesetters. And he also found that they have the typesetters had different ideas about punctuation, about capitalization, because in 17th century, 16th, 17th century, the German habit of capitalizing nouns was still kind of around, and so there is one of the compositors who does it a lot, and then another who doesn't do it at all. So even in the first folio, the punctuation is not consistent. When it comes to modern complete works, it's a catastrophe, because you have things like to be or not to be dash, that is the question. Well, I don't think that the typeface in 1623 probably even had a dash. So that's a modern invention. So to be or not to be, that is the question. And that is finished with, in my version, a colon. I haven't checked my folio version, but I would imagine it's probably a full stop. It would make more sense to me. So to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep. Now here we have something called a midline ending, i.e., and by opposing end them, full stop, to die, to sleep. Now, one of the things that I have learned as an actor, and I have John Barton, Ian McKellen, Judi Dench to back me up on this, if you have a verse line and you have a full stop in the middle of a verse line, you do not treat it as you would treat a full stop in a prose text. You do not breathe in the middle of a verse line, and I can quote Antonin Artaud on the effect of breath on the actor.
Yeah.
So you do not breathe in the middle of a verse line, but you come crashing in with the next sentence. Now, I'll show you what I mean. Or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more. So, and compare that to, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep. Which sounds more spontaneous? Which sounds more real? Somebody talking. The first one sounds like a literary, an academic professor giving a discourse, and the second sounds like a human being going, "Oh, what, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep." And so, in this, there are several midline endings. If we go down a couple of more lines, the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep. Compare that to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. You see how by stopping, particularly in the middle of a verse line, because it's a sentence end, creates a totally different dynamic from what I believe Shakespeare was intending. Your observation about how this version, the second version, the folio version, essentially, flows better, sounds more real than the other version, is because the man's a genius.
So if that's technically how it works, what it's doing is both bringing in obviously the power of poetry itself, but the character that he's trying to present to us in Hamlet.
Exactly.
And the other characters. And that's important here because the soliloquy, of course, we have had many Shakespeare soliloquies before this play, but this is the play where they really come into their own as a dramatic technique.
Yes. So much has been written about this speech in particular, but I think if you don't understand the functions of the way he used iambic pentameter, I think you miss a lot. Because one of the other things is the way Shakespeare orchestrates speech, and come to that the whole his whole plays, and not only orchestrates them in a theatrical sense, but also the way he takes the player on the journey that the character is going through. Now, again, one has to go back a bit to the original practices, what happened when these were new works. The actors did not have, the players did not have access to the full play. They only had access to their cue scripts, and the cue script being 3 words of a cue, and then your text. And so it's a bit like the second trombonist in Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. Nobody's going to give him the entire score of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony to the second trombonist. So they know what they've got to play, and they have in front of them a conductor who goes, "And you," yes. at the appropriate moment. And given that they did a different play every day, anything that we consider as a rehearsal process is completely out of the question, which means one thing that is extremely important is that everything the player needs to perform his text, to perform his character, must be embedded in the text itself. And that includes a great deal of information, like moves, like, why dost thou stand so far off? Oh, whoops. And
Yeah.
of course, they must have been incredibly receptive and able to improvise, to be able to stand so far off without making it look as though it is the result of that of somebody saying that to them. Don't forget how much the commedia dell'arte tradition influenced what the early modern players were doing. So, so to go back to the to be or not to be speech, there it is. I mean, every there have been 10 million probably different performances of it, things written about it. What does it really mean, and so on. One exercise that I have developed also with any certainly iambic pentameter speech is that the last word of each line. Shakespeare had such an incredible mastery of language that he could deform, if you like, the syntax to create a situation where the last word of each line, each 5-beat line, each pentameter line, is the important word. And here, if you have the text in front of you, you go question, suffer, fortune, troubles, sleep, end, shocks, consummation, rub, come, coil, respect, time, contumely, delay, spurns, takes, bear, life, death. Look at that, life and death. Born, will, have, of, all, resolution, thought. Resolution, thought, moment, awry, and soft you now. So actually, just by going down the speech and looking at those last words, you get a very clear idea of what the speech is actually about, without going into long academic diatribes, because it's all there. Mm-hmm. And also the very first line itself, to be or not to be, that is the question. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about existential, especially if you go back to the Quietus and Bodkin. He's not talking about killing himself. He's talking about killing Claudius. I could get my quits with a bare bodkin. And then he goes off a bit and he starts to go on to a bit of a ravel, a rant, or almost Trumpian distraction. But when he himself might his Quietus make with a bare bodkin. Yeah, all I need is a dagger. Yeah, it's not for me. That dagger is not for me. I could get my quits with a simple dagger. And so for me, that changes a lot about what people perceive the speech to be about. There's one more thing that I'm going to talk about in the structure of the way Shakespeare uses iambic pentameter. 5. To be or not to be, that is the question. Now, I have, since I kind of clocked this, I have looked at hundreds of speeches, and having figured this out for myself, I've looked at speeches that I know, speeches that I've studied, that I've performed, and speeches that I've never, I've never even looked at. And there are 5, and each of the 5 has a distinct function. The first beat, to be, introduces, if you like, what the line is all about. Or not is the second beat. Now, what I've looked at and what I've discovered from having looked at hundreds of iambic pentameter lines is that the second beat is either there to reinforce what was in the first beat or to provide an contradiction, a contresens. So in this case, obviously, it's contresens. Okay. To be or not to be. So now we have the third beat. And the third beat is the middle beat of the line. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 3 is the middle of 5. Now the middle beat is the balance point of the line. In this case, by repeating the original to be and balancing it on the third beat to be, you've got the before and after. Okay, to be or not to be. Now the fourth beat, which is the one that throws everybody off in so many cases, is the fourth beat is there to lead to the fifth beat, which, as I said earlier, is the most important beat in the line. So that, as I see it, people may disagree, to be or not to be, that is the question. Now, we do, when we are reading, we would never consider an is to be a strong beat, but it is what people do. Why do they stress it? Because it's, in French you have oui or si, because si is yes, but it's yes as a contradiction to something that has been said before. So again, this, by following those 5 beats and their function, this changes that line from what a lot of people think about to be or not to be. That is the question. Or to be or not to be, that is the question. Or to be or not to be, or not to be. There's an extraordinarily funny sketch of a whole series of extremely good actors coming out to do the to be or not to be. Yes, with Prince Charles coming out and doing it right. So that fourth beat is so vital because it's there to drive, to lead in to that fifth beat, and it gets lost. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time? Okay, for who, 1, would bear, 2, the whips, 3, and scorns, 4, of time. So if we follow the reading, following those, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time? Scorns falls on the fourth beat. Why? Whips and scorns. I mean, it's reinforcing the whips. And the whips is in the middle, and most people don't like whips. Some do. Another one, but that the dread of something after death, that fourth beat, after death, that fourth beat is so vital. Well, it's if you give it its value, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose born, one has to be careful, because if you take he does play with the iambic pentameter, because otherwise it risks becoming incredibly ti-tum, 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 ti-tum. Ti-tum, 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 ti-tum. So occasionally he trips the player up by putting in a trochee or a anapest or different feet. I mean, also he takes liberties with the iambs. If you take friends, Romans, countrymen, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. The friends, Romans, it has to be a trochee. You cannot do friends, Romans. Yeah. And so, but then he often does that because it's the beginning, the beginning of a big speech, or
Yes.
turning it round. Now is the winter of our discontent. You can't go. Now is the winter of our discontent. So again, it's the opening of the play. So you've got to attack, but you have to be aware of what he's doing, and nothing, like Mozart, nothing is by chance.
So is there a question of how we reconcile that nothing is by chance with the fact that we don't have, this is Shakespeare's absolute version of the play?
Oh,
as
yes,
far as we know?
yes. Two things that I would add to what I'm saying here is, if it doesn't sound like Shakespeare, it's quite possibly not. It's quite probably not, although it's been published as such. But there is one other thing that is important. Hemmings and Condell were overseeing the folio, the printing of the folio. So I would imagine they were probably very much eyes on, hands on. And so when it came to the typesetters, because certainly at the time the typesetters had enormous license. Again, as you see in the folio, because the same word is often spelt differently, because it was set by a different typesetter. And so I would have more faith in the folio version than perhaps any other, because of its history, which I go into in Shakespeare Unbound. And so there is one other thing about the use of iambic pentameter, again, which I will, with your indulgence, go into with the other speech that I want to look at. While I find it, basically, if your character is expressing himself easily, then he is almost certainly being in control of his thoughts. In fact, this is something one needs to take into account with Shakespeare, certainly for modern actors. Be careful. There is no subtext. Unless you're playing Iago. Then it's all subtext. But then Iago is lying, and we know he is. So it's Act 2, Scene 1. There is no subtext because what you see is what you get. By trying to overlay or underlay subtext onto Shakespeare, you can disappear down a rabbit hole of intellectualism, which is death on stage. In fact, I once had an hour and a half meeting with Stanley Wells, Sir Stanley Wells, and we talked about a lot of things. But he said something which stuck in my brain ever since. And he was at the time, he was head of Shakespeare Studies at Oxford University. And he said, the problem with most modern productions of Shakespeare is that they are far too intellectual. And I thought, coming from the head of Shakespeare Studies at Oxford University, that is pretty damning. Now, I want to go through this, and before I actually sort of perform it, break it down. So the first line, well, now I am alone. Well, And we'll leave that out. Okay. Oh, look at the iambic pentameter. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Perfect iambic pentameter. The 5 beats. What a rogue. 2. And peasant, slave. 4. Am I, slave am I. Okay. Okay, so it's rhetoric, it's hyperbole, it's we know he's not a slave, he's not a peasant, he's not really a rogue. So I mean the whole thing is hyperbole in the extreme. So from here on in, we have an incredibly long sentence. Well, it's not as long as Horatio's sentence in the opening scene, which he has one sentence which lasts for about 40 lines. But it's actually quite long. Now, technically, you'd have to be, I think, a deep-sea diver to be able to do all that on one breath. So where do we breathe? Well, rule number 1, you do not breathe in the middle of a verse line. Rule number 2, if your verse line is an enjambment, if the sense runs on, you have to have an upward inflection. Okay, as long as you have an upward inflection, you're okay. Rule number 3, look for any assonance or alliteration. Forces soul. Forces soul so to his own. You've got that vowel repeated frequently, four times. Rule number 5, we do not breathe in the middle of a rule number 1, we do not breathe in the middle of a verse line. So when we do actually get to a sentence end, we crash in on the next sentence. Going back to rule number 2, as long as you leave an upward inflection, you can take a breath. And you can take a breath at the end of any of those lines. As long as you've left an upward inflection, you'll take the audience with you. Okay, so, yeah. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I, going down. Is it not monstrous that this player here, going up, but in a fiction and a dream of passion, going up, could force his soul so to his own conceit, I'm exaggerating, that from her working all his visaged wand, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice and his whole function suiting, with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing? Now, inexperienced actors will go down at the end of a verse line, and there you have the incredible, boring Shakespeare. Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction and a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit, that from her working all his visage wand, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect. I mean, the audience has fallen asleep. I mean, completely. Because and a lot of the time it doesn't actually make sense. Because if you go down, it's the end of a sentence, which means that the next line is the beginning of a new sentence. Well, so you're not taking the audience with you. So now I'm going to do it. Now, okay, we missed that one. Yeah. Where do you breathe? It doesn't matter. Anywhere. Anywhere you feel is cogent to the performance. That from her working all his visage wand, tears in his eyes. You can see how by using the breath, you can take a breath anywhere at the end of a verse line, never in the middle. So now I'm going to do it. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction and a dream of passion, force his soul so to his own conceit, that from her working all his visage wand, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing? For Hecuba? I have done this speech a million times, and when I do the whole speech, I'm exhausted at the end because what Shakespeare does is take me on a roller coaster of a journey by simply by following these. I have a friend who's a concert pianist who plays his speciality is Mozart, and I say, and we went to a concert, and I said, I'm just amazed at how you play Mozart. He said, I don't play Mozart. Mozart plays me. And I thought, bingo, you don't play Shakespeare. Shakespeare plays you. Once you know how, and of course, to play Mozart at top international concert level, you need an enormous amount of technique and hours spent running scales and keeping your fingers, and so it's down to the technique. Once you have the technique, Shakespeare will take over.
Mm. And that carries you through. I mean, this speech is quite long. We've only done the first, probably a quarter of it, and it's by no means the longest speech in the play or other Shakespeare plays as well. So what percentage of your effort is compensated by technique, but you still have to put in the hours of understanding, part of the rehearsal process?
Yes and no. To quote Peter Brook, when rehearsing for, I think it was The Winter's Tale, his quote was, when we were rehearsing, we discovered that the best way to understand what it meant was to actually do it. And as I said earlier, I have made many discoveries about what a speech actually is through applying my techniques. What it means by doing it, and what I thought it meant when I just read it, can be sometimes completely contradictory. And certainly what it means, what I discover it means by performing it, is very much richer and very much deeper than what I think it means when I just read it.
And you do have to convey as much of that as you can to an audience who are at different levels of concentration and understanding, but to a degree it also flows us over sitting in the audience.
Exactly. I mean, because, again, going back to my pianist friend, the audience are not interested in his technique. They're interested in the results. And what they hear. They don't care that he spent hours and hours and hours practicing his scales, and it has to be said, working on the interpretation. But you cannot work on the interpretation until you've got the technique down. That goes for music, and that goes for acting. Let's carry on with the next paragraph, because what happens here is really interesting. Okay, so we've got to for Hecuba. Now we have for Hecuba, which is a short line. Okay, so we've got just one beat, and then we've got 2, 3, 4, 5. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba? That he should weep for her, what would he do? Had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have, he would drown the stage with tears and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears, yet I. Okay, so you have a series of lines where the and falls on a strong beat. Oh, that's not good. We don't stress and. Yeah, well, I like coffee, and I like it black. I'd like a coffee and a piece of cake. Okay. It's actually a perfect iambic pentameter sentence. I'd like a coffee and a piece of cake.
So it is.
So again, so I'd like a coffee and a piece of cake. By stressing the and, you actually open up a whole plethora of what's actually behind that. Did he forget the cake last time? So, by stressing the and, which we do, it opens up another area of understanding. Okay, so for Hecuba, 2, 3, 4, 5. For Hecuba, what's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do? Had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have, he would drown the stage with tears and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I... And you see how by putting those conjunctions in on strong beats, it makes it sound so alive. So what would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears. I mean, yes, okay. I mean, why not? But that's not where Shakespeare put it. Confound the ignorant and amaze indeed. Okay, by stressing the and where Shakespeare has chosen to put it, it makes it so much more alive. Confound the ignorant and amaze indeed. It's somebody speaking. Confound the ignorant and amaze indeed is somebody reading. Just one more thing about this speech, is after the yet I, which is another short line with 4 beats, you get a couple of lines of perfect iambic pentameter, a dull and muddy metal rascal peak like Jana dreams, I'm pregnant of my cause and can say nothing, no, not for it.
Yes, so does that lead us nicely into just talk a bit about, a bit conscious of time,
to absolutely fall
last bit,
giving the impression,
being very generous, I don't want to keep you longer than we've said.
As an actor who's done this,
but if that leads us into a little talk about character to finish
giving
off
the
with,
impression,
unless there was anything you particularly wanted to add there. In which case, I'm very happy.
I'm going mad.
Put it in.
I'm going out of my mind. I cannot.
I mean, thank you. This not only has this been fascinating for my audience, I'm sure, but also for me. And I shall certainly be looking at the way I fumble through the quotations that I do in a different way after speaking with you.
After the yet I, they gradually become more and more chaotic. Superb. I mean, how does he manage this?
And so subtle that it's something as an audience member we might perceive but not be aware of how it's being done. We've just been given this impression through the words. And of course, by this stage, we know that Hamlet is about to put on his antic disposition, because that's been mentioned in the previous scene before that. But this is more genuine.
There are 2 more short lines as O vengeance. And so those pauses are, let me gather my wits. And after O vengeance, you get some perfect iambic pentameter lines. Why, what an ass am I, this is most brave. And then again, you've got a longish sentence there, which runs those 6 lines. And then a scullion, another short line. So he gathers his thoughts, he gathers his wits. And then following scullion, you go back to iambic pentameter. Okay, I've got a plan. I've got a coherent plan. And I know what I'm going to do. And that is reflected in the way the verse is structured.
My thanks to Colin for taking the time to speak to us and for being so generous with his time and insights. I have put a link to Shakespeare Unbound and Colin's website, so please do go and have a look at all the details there. I've also added a link to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre's sketch To Be or Not to Be on YouTube, taken from their gala evening commemorating the 400th anniversary of the death of Shakespeare that Colin mentioned in our conversation. It's well worth a look. And so Colin will return to conclude our discussion with a look at the character of Polonius in 2 episodes' time. But next time it's back to the play, where you'll remember we left Polonius dead behind the arras, Gertrude in fear of her life, and Hamlet seemingly going quite out of control. In the meantime, if you've not done so already, please join the Facebook page or group, or find the podcast on Instagram or Blue Sky just to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. If you do feel able to help out with the costs of running the podcast, then please head on over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation for selected episodes. You can also make a one-off show of support through Ko-fi.com. I look forward to your company next time, but if you do have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com, or through the website, where you can leave me a voice message by clicking on the microphone icon, or you can write to me on the contact page. That's all at www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com.